J.K. Rowling's done it again. The author of the Harry Potter series is known not only for her fantasy worlds, but also for her transphobic tweets, triggering a new controversy every time. What has she done this time, you ask? Well, fans noted that her latest novel seemed to mirror her own public downfall after her TERF statements. Yep, the book features a character persecuted over transphobia, much like the ROW herself. Coincidence or not? Let's find out. For starters, what made fans think the novel was based on her life? Rowling's new novel, The Ink Black Heart, is part of her crime thriller series Cormoran Strike that she's been writing under the pseudonym of Robert Galbraith. Now, much like the Harry Potter series, this series too is fictional and rooted in the fantasy and make-believe world that she's known for. This time though, the book has more than a passing resemblance to reality, and not in a good way. Fans noticed that the plot was a mirror of the author's own experiences, where she took a lot of heat for expressing transphobic views in recent years. Up next, it's no secret that Rowling's lost many fans ever since her coming out as a TERF. She might have given us strong female characters in her books, but in the real world, fans were shocked when her feminism took a strong anti-trans turn. Unless you've been living under a rock, you'd know too well how Rowling became the target of Twitter mobs. It all started with her tweet that mocked an opinion piece using the term people who menstruate. She was upset it didn't use the word women, completely ignoring the plight of trans women. She didn't stop there. No, over the years, she continued to give us her hot takes on a lot of sensitive gender issues. She liked tweets that described trans women as men in dress. When activist Maya Forstater was fired for her transphobic tweets, you bet she was there to offer her support. Now, get this, she even penned a lengthy statement in June 2020 about the reasons she's worried about new trans activism. Come on, you have to give it to ROW for her dedication. Following this, the Potterheads shunned her for turning her back on the trans community. As the backlash grew, even Harry Potter stars Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint condemned her remarks. To make it obvious, the author of the series herself wasn't invited to the Return of Hogwarts special reunion. But if you thought the 57-year-old would have learned her lesson by now, you couldn't be more wrong. She has doubled down on her stance and insisted that the Twitter mob's a modern-day witch hunt looking to persecute and shame her. Wait, that's not all. She went on to write a whole new novel to support this narrative of being bullied and canceled for speaking up. Yes, the latest installment in the best-selling thriller Strike series seems heavily inspired by someone's Twitter adventures. Let's look at how close the book really is to Rowling's reality. Basically, in the book, she introduces readers to a new character, Edie Lewell, a popular YouTube content creator who makes cartoons. But after her cartoon was called out for being racist, ableist, and transphobic, the internet trolls and her own fandom turns on her. Sound familiar? But in this version, the trolls take things too far. The cartoonist's doxxed with photos of her home plastered on the internet. She gets death and rape threats for having an opinion, and in the end, she's found stabbed to death in a cemetery. Brutal, isn't it? The author said in November that she's received death threats and also publicly accused 3 trans activists for harassing her. According to her, they posted photos of themselves holding pro-trans rights signs outside her house in Scotland, making sure her address was visible to all. But did we mention her home is a popular tourist attraction? So really, claiming the protesters leaked her address is too far-fetched even for the imaginative author. Now, we can tell where Rowling's going with this one. The similarities between her and Lewell are too big to ignore. Of course, except for the dying part. The book clearly targets social justice warriors and shows that Lewell was a victim of a masterfully plotted, politically fueled hate campaign against her. To put it simply, Joan's throwing herself a big pity party with her latest book. It's like warning her Twitter haters to be nice to her before something tragic happens. As if it wasn't obvious, she claims that this was totally unintentional. In an interview with Graham Norton, she claimed it was all just a big coincidence. I should make it really clear after some of the things that have happened in the last year that this book isn't depicting that, she told readers. Now, according to the novelist, she had started writing the books way before her online downfall. I said this to my husband, I think everyone's going to see this as a response to what happened to me, but it genuinely wasn't, she insisted. So, Rowling claims that the first draft of the book was finished before she was publicly canceled. Looks like someone needs a dose of that truth potion. Not to mention, she stopped short of calling herself a psychic. When confronted in a Q&A on Galbraith's website, she went so far as to say her book had predicted what would happen to her in the controversy. She replied that many who'd read her manuscripts were amazed at her being a clairvoyant when it happened to her. The author even turned turned poetic, saying, "It was just one of those weird twists. Sometimes life imitates art more than one would like. Move over, Trelawney. Looks like we have a new seer among us." Next up, the critics aren't buying her explanations. Both the Sunday Times and the Telegraph have both pointed out the obvious connection, giving the novel very bleak reviews. But we warn you, the critic comments are so harsh, you'd start feeling bad for the author. They described the book as hilariously self-persecuting and beyond parody. It's embarrassing enough that she wrote a book to get pity votes. She went ahead and wrote 1,024 pages for it. The book's ridiculously long length wasn't lost on the critics. One funny review called it 500 pages longer than Dune, 300 pages longer than Infinite Jest, and 100 pages longer than the Bible. Most fans who reviewed the novels called for people to boycott her work, instead drawing attention to the real-world problems transgenders face. We don't know what she was expecting from this book, but she's dug her own grave this time too. In other news, moving on, Twitter had a field day with the release of The Ink Black Heart. If Rowling's getting cancelled, you bet the Twitter netizens will be there. The news of her book release took the Twitter world by storm, prompting dueling hashtags of #IStandWithJK Rowling and #ICan'tStandJK Rowling. Yes, the novelist is getting roasted on Twitter once again for her novel about getting roasted. Some dedicated trollers even bought the book to highlight how petty the author's being. One post showed there's a good portion of the novel dedicated to fictitious mean tweets. It's funny seeing how butthurt she sounds in some of these tweets. Fans claim this is what happens when a novelist spends too much time on social media. Next up, the queer podcast for Harry Potter also dissed Joanne for her book. Our favorite take on the book has to be from Lark Malachi Gray, the co-host of the queer Harry Potter, The Gaily Prophet, told NPR over email that he'd find the situation deeply embarrassing for the novelist. We all do, don't we? Gray explained how Rowling published a very long self-insert fan fiction to paint herself as the victim. We can all agree with him when he says that you'd expect this behavior from a petty teen, not a grown adult with so much power and wealth. He even went as far as to say that seeing the internet filled with jokes about the book was an absolute joy for him and the community after all the harm she's caused the LGBTQ community over the years. Lastly, Billboard Chris claims he's inspired by J.K. Rowling. Chris Elston has received international fame, and for all the wrong reasons. A firm critic of the trans movement, Chris claims he's an activist to defend children from gender identity ideology. He became known as Billboard Chris for wearing billboards on his front and back, bearing statements like "children can't consent to puberty blockers." Now, Chris recently said in an interview that one of his role models is none other than the Harry Potter novelist. In fact, the first thing he did on his anti-trans mission was to put up an actual billboard saying "I love J.K. Rowling," following Posey Parker in the UK, who'd put up a similar poster. Well, the billboard lasted a day, getting paint bombed overnight. Chris is just as dedicated as his inspiration, walking throughout Canada and the US and having conversations with men and women about how transgender activism is a cult. Looks like the fictional writer's gone from uniting kids in imaginative worlds to uniting bigoted protesters. And that's a wrap for this video. What do you think about Rowling's new book? Let us know in the comments below. Do give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell notification for similar videos. See you in the next one.